The way I propose to do it, in order to get to the future Singapore, I need to have a brief introduction into the key elements of the past and the present, because the past and the present, the way the economy is developed, the strategies that we use, the routes we've already taken, are constraining us to go a certain way right now and will constrain our choices and options, whether it's for well-being or directions of development. The three topics I want to cover in the course of these two sessions is, first I want to talk about the growth model and policy, to understand our historical roots and current choices in terms of economic and industrial policy strategy. But I also want to touch on how Singapore is now cyclically. We are in a stagnation cyclically right now. Why it's likely to be a multi-year thing, and what are the kind of macro policies we need to think about to get out of this. Right? And these are intertwined with the longer structural reforms of the economy. Second topic, so that's growth model and policy. The second topic I need to talk about is social policy. And here I need to talk about the social policy imperatives, the social protection imperatives that I believe Singapore needs to put in place. I need to explain why this is so. This is intimately connected to global and local trends. You've seen the most recent of which has resulted in the inauguration of perhaps the most dangerous president in US history. But these are the self-same trends that we need to address, and the most important antidote is social policy. So we need to discuss that thoroughly. The second topic, social policy. The third is I want to talk to an issue that Keng Soon's been needling about, which I will broadly say, Singapore's state and estate. Okay, state and estate, because I want to talk about the resources that we have accumulated over our successful economic history. I don't want to talk about it in detail, otherwise I'll go to jail. But I want to talk about it in general terms. What are the key issues about our state and estate? Because these are the resources we will need to dig ourselves out of the hole that we've dug ourselves into, to address the social policy issues that will prevent us from becoming a second-rate Trumpian accident waiting to happen. These are the resources we'll need to really flesh out both the social policy and the growth policy that fulfills our potential as a country. Okay, so here we go. So I just want to go into history very quickly. First of all, just to give you a brief idea of where we have been, so you have an idea of where we are. All right, so these are the key phases of Singapore's economic development, broken down into two different historical periods. So this I would call, the early miracle. Okay, the early miracle constituted in us becoming independent by accident in 1965 and being forced to develop, actually under Goh Keng Swee's very brilliant economic architectural thinking, a strategy called export-oriented industrialization. In the first instance, but foreign direct investment-led export-oriented industrialization. In the last, and this was Dr. Goh's great innovation, okay, which he lived to mildly regret, and if you were alive today, he would probably live to greatly regret. But anyway, the second stage was, and by 72, we had already reached full employment. So effective was this strategy, right? From a state of a high unemployment and underemployment in 65 to full employment and needing a large number of Malaysian workers in 72. So here we then entered the stage that I will call the most promising years. The 70 to 80 was middle export-oriented industrialization, when actually, against the expectations of both Goh Keng Swee and Lee Kuan Yew, this economic miracle that it created showed it had far greater potential. What was happening then was actually industries were beginning to upgrade, and productivity was beginning to rise, and real wages, value added per worker, was beginning to rise. And actually, real wages were rising, something that they had never expected. The success of this model exceeded their wildest expectations. They were not expecting to get into the first world in a hurry. They were quite happy just to be a middle-income country that helped the people. All right, but here we were, and we were at the edge of a takeoff, which they attempted to accelerate in 80 to 83 unsuccessfully under Lim Chong Yah and Goh Keng Swee. Unfortunately, because they forced wages up too fast, we had a recession. And then there was a great review conducted by Lee Hsien Loong. Goh Keng Swee then retired. It was a convenient time for him to retire. I was there then when it happened, so I know what exactly were the issues. I was working for Booking Suite at the time. Then under PM Lee, we had a review and then a retreat from this industrial upgrading. And then we went into 20 years of what I would call the neoliberal, labor-intensive go for growth strategy. It began under actually PM Go, and then continued under PM Lee in a way that would have made Dr. Go turn in his grave. Okay, so unfortunately, this has left us where we are now in an unsustainable position, which we then, after a review by DPM Tharman, 2010, called the Economic Strategist Review, we are now again on a corrective and I hopefully a correct growth path. And the path we are on is now we move from labor intensive to productivity intensive growth, because we realized that this was not just economically but also politically unsustainable. Okay, so here we are on the cusp of something new, and that's in history since 2010 to 2015, and I just want to earmark to you the accomplishments at each stage. Okay, the first, when we achieved full employment by 72, we created what we effectively abolished the poverty of the day, because we created what we called multi-income families. Means to say previously everybody was underemployed. We were lucky if the head of the household was employed. 20% of the head of the household were not employed. Everybody else was not employed, but they had a lot of kids, all right, living in the proto-HDB flats, which at that time, I remember, were one-room flats. And if you went to Toa Payoh in the day and you looked down the corridor, you'd see in the evening a row of heads sticking out in the corridor because they were so small and with so little ventilation, people had to sleep with their heads in the corridor, right? So what a long way we've become. But that was a great innovation, HDB. This was the stage where multi-income families began to be fully employed at low wages, very low wages. But think of it, $200 a month, $300 a month of the day. Before that, only the head of the household had it, and sometimes he didn't. Now you had him and 2 children having it. So straight away, you tripled household income. 300% rise in household income, right? You'll never see that kind of rise in real incomes today. And this effectively abolished poverty. Take-home wage, collectively as a family, was higher than the living wage. And this is one of the great achievements of the first generation of leaders.
What year was that?
By 72. But 7 years they've done it. And then here, in 72, when we saw productivity rising and we saw that the factories were going from just simple assembly to assembly and testing, from testing cautiously into wafer fabrication, Dr. Go was always early, who always thought through things out, tried to accelerate the industrial upgrading. Why? Because at that time he had an insight that only the creator of this very innovative policy understood. Now he created not just this policy, he also helped create EDB, JTC, DBS, MASGIC, and with Lim Kim Sun's help, HDB, right? So this was the giant or the guy who innovated these developmental institutions that were just not seen before in the world, right? HDB remains today, I would say, the #1 public housing policy in the world. There's no equal, even in the Scandinavian countries. Okay, but remember that in order to do this, these guys were not laissez-faire economists. There was massive intelligent intervention into the economy. Remember that in order to do this, they had to appropriate 80% of the land in Singapore. They had to effectively conduct land reform. They conducted the biggest land reform outside Communist China. Nowhere else does the country own 80 to 90% of the land. And now it is the property, it is the property of you and me. It's the property of the state. I'll talk about that in state and estate. But this was one of a number of his innovations, and putting the Army and Navy and Air Force together. And he foresaw that export-oriented industrialization, FDI-led, was not sustainable. And he gave 2 very clear reasons. The first reason was that if in 10 years, most of our key industry is owned by foreigners, we are in trouble. That's the first thing he said. Second thing he said was, if in 10 years, we are still dependent on massive amounts of migrant labor, we are even more in trouble. Unfortunately, he accelerated industrial upgrading. There was a review. he left, and the following policymakers, led by PM Lee, at that time was the Economic Ministry, and then followed through by Goh Chok Tong, and then PM Lee himself. That being the case, they forgot the worries of this old man. Thought of it as the quaint musings of a spent old man when it was really, his most important insight for the next generation. So this was buried. And I remember then our PM Tharman, who was working with me in the Monetary Authority, he was my boss, wrote a paper called The Long-Term Growth Rate of Singapore. It's much featured in the economic circles in government. This was 1985. Okay. And in it, he predicted that our maximum growth rate for the next 10 years would be between 3 to 6%. This was after like 8-9% growth. And everybody said, wow, so low. And the reason that he brought it down was because he said we can't keep growing the labor force at 3 to 4%. We have to bring it down to 1 to 2%. And therefore productivity has to take up the slack and grow. But this was all forgotten in the next phase. So what happened in the next phase? So we went for goal for growth, or what is goal for growth? Goal for growth is maximizing the rate of growth by maximizing labor force growth. So to economists long term, you can just break down total growth to two simple components. A, labor force growth, and B, productivity growth. If you add them, you get total growth. It is a tautology. You cannot escape from it. All right? And it was difficult to go for productivity. So they went for labor supply. So they opened the floodgates to foreign skilled and unskilled labor. And over a period of 20 years, the population went from 3.3 million to 5.2 million. And the foreign workforce went from 300,000 to 1.3 million. I'm just talking excluding. And 700,000 of those 1.3 million, 800,000 were factory workers, service sector workers, and then in Lee Hsien Loong's time, service sector workers, S-Pass workers. And we achieved a fantastic rate of growth. We outgrew Hong Kong. And very often our leaders tell us we are more successful because, look, our model beat Hong Kong. What they don't tell us is that as a result, real wages for our working people are roughly 2/3 to half of that in Hong Kong, because they did not have the productivity growth they want to incentivize. They are still incentivized to use as much cheap labor as possible, so they'll build a house with a whole gang of laborers, as opposed to using, let's say in Australia, 2 fellas in a van, right? You can build it faster. So this was the great mistake, because we carried this on for 20 years. We didn't just carry it on for 2 years. And over 20 years, the cumulative impact on our population now is such that we are faced with very restricted future choices. Ended up with a population of what I would call the working poor. So we've created an underclass. We created a poverty class that threatens to become an underclass. We created a socio-economic time bomb, which I'll have it on in a little bit. Now we've gone to the final stage. So this is the rise of the working poor. We've had Tharman in, had a better doctor in, look at the patient, and he said, okay, I don't think we need so many foreign workers. We have to go on productivity, growth rate. PM just said today, you're lucky you get 2 to 3. This is what we should have said a long time ago. And most of that growth should come from productivity. That's quality growth. That is the basis of higher real wage growth. That is the basis of lifting our working classes out of poverty, where the real market wage will be hopefully above the living wage. Where are we now? So we have become in that 50-year interregnum. We've grown ourselves into a regional business and services hub, which was not there when we first started. We've held our ground as a global manufacturing sector, which is achieved by 72. And we've also added the global financial sector, right? Third biggest forex trading, the world's biggest private wealth management, our biggest Asia dollar market. We do yuan clearing, RMB clearing, blah, 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 blah. And you can see from the figures that manufacturing is as large as it was in 70. You can see that insurance and finance has just grown much larger. You can see that business services also grew much larger. So this represents where we are now.